Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. I'm going to do roll call and then you can go. Okay. Can you take roll call, please?
Chair Caballero.
Here.
Vice Chair Howardson.
Here.
Councilmember Baker. Commissioner Jacobs.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Middleton. Planning Commissioner Cameron. And Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
And then could we go ahead and do a excused absence for Councilmember Baker?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda? Nope. Okay. And do we have any announcements? I just want to say go Canes. That's all. We'll come back to approval of minutes. Oh, no, we don't have any. Sorry, I don't have my reading glasses on, y'all. And then do we have any priority items from city or county managers? No, awesome. And so the next item on our agenda is the new UDO update. I think Bo is up.
Bo Dobrinsky Planning. As you all are aware, because we've held this special meeting, so I appreciate everyone's flexibility. Code Studio and their team, as well as Tawana Allen, our engagement consultant, are here to present the code audit and analysis, along with some recommendations how to move forward in this new UDO rewrite project. And I'll let them take off. Obviously, stop and ask any questions during the presentation that you'd like. Thanks.
Thanks, Bo. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm gonna share my screen here. Blow this up a little bit. Hopefully you can all see this okay. Thanks for, and can hear me. So thanks for taking the time to have this special meeting. Looking forward to this conversation. Feel free, as Bo said, to jump in if you have any questions. I don't think this necessarily is a presentation that we have to go from start to finish and then do questions. If you see something that you need clarification on or additional information, if we can provide it, we'll be happy to stop and have a chat. It is, I mean, I can see you guys, you know, from like big picture, but I guess so just jump in there with a verbal cue if you want to interject about something. So it's been about 3 months, I think, since we last saw you. So in that time, we've been working diligently in the background, looking at your existing UDO and thinking about kind of a strategy and approach for updating it and moving forward. So just so that we're all on the same page, because this has come up a fair amount as we've been doing our outreach work, just making sure that we're all on the same page and have a understanding of kind of what the UDO is and kind of what it does and how it differs from the comprehensive plan that you just adopted. So the comprehensive plan is kind of that high-level visionary plan that kind of guides and plans where and how future development should occur in Durham. And the Unified Development Ordinance kind of is the key implementing tool for the comprehensive plan. It defines the details of where and how private development should occur. So it kind of takes the visionary plan and kind of takes it down to the ground and has the development rules associated with implementing the comprehensive plan. And, you know, if you go down a level, the UDO, again, is, you know, what shapes the built environment and approves and built. Development is approved and built based on the rules in the UDO. So we were just thinking a little bit about, how did we get here? And we just want to help people understand kind of why we're doing this now, why we're updating UDO now. So it's been a while since the UDO was last comprehensively updated, 2006. So, almost 20 years. A lot has happened in those 20 years. And so, as I'm sure a number of you can remember, we had the kind of economic and financial crisis, the housing crash in 2008, where, pretty much the housing market fell out of the bottom, and a lot of people in trouble. It took about 7, 8 years for kind of the economy to get back to where it was, and I think in about 2015, housing prices started to climb, as you probably noticed in Durham. I think as a result of that, maybe you guys saw some gaps in the UDO. So you guys started working on some changes to the residential regulations, and you came up with the expanding housing choice program, which is a pretty good program. It seems to have done a really good job. And then we all got kind of hit by the COVID pandemic in 2019, 2020. That really changed things from a lot of perspectives. But one of the things that it really did do is kind of really change the housing dynamic. Housing prices started to really increase. Construction costs increased. It was just things were starting to spiral out of control. Kind of in that time, you've got the new comprehensive plan adopted, and then I guess the expanding housing choices didn't go far enough. So the SCAT amendments happened to kind of really look at trying to fine tune the ordinance in terms of as it relates to housing. And so kind of here we are today. You've got a lot of different moving parts. A lot has happened in the last 20 years or so. And so I think the time is right to kind of step back, look at all the different moving components, see where Durham is headed as a community, and really take a comprehensive look and rethink at the structure and the approach of the UDO. So, just kind of from a big picture perspective, why are we doing this? I think we want to make the UDO easier to use, clearer, simplify it. Housing is a big issue. So we want to make sure, we're taking a look at housing, making sure we're encouraging the right type of housing in Durham. We want to, promote transit-oriented development. We want to make Durham more walkable, but we also want to make sure we're preserving, what makes Durham, Durham. Making sure there's open space and tree canopy, and just in general promoting more sustainable development. And then let's not forget that one of the key goals of this project is to implement a recently adopted comprehensive plan and any other kind of adopted plans and policies that you have in place that relate to land use and development. So just some of the things we're going to touch on with today's presentation. I wanted to give you a quick update on what we've been doing on kind of outreach and engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about some improvements that could be made to kind of the overall usability of the UDO. We wanted to look at some tools and techniques that you could think about for providing more options for kind of, we're calling it small scale residential infill, but infill in kind of established neighborhoods. Looking at ways to better utilize land kind of in existing and proposed multifamily areas, and then promoting density. How can we do a better job of promoting density around existing and future transit lines? So there's some of the key things we're going to look at with today's presentation. So I think the last time we talked to you, we were about to have these 2 open houses. So we've done 2 open houses. We did one in the Durham County Administration Building, and then we did one out the Campus Hill Recreation Center. So those are very good conversations. We saw a fair amount of people and really got an opportunity to chat the variety of folks and introduce the project to them and start to hear some feedback from people in the general public. We've done a Code Connect, middle of February. It was a very successful kind of online presentation done in both Spanish and English. And we heard from very good conversations from people that participated in the webinar. We've also done a survey. I think we might have alluded to this last time we were here. It's a very kind of intended to be a very short and simple survey, just to kind of set the stage and ask a few questions about 3 key topics: housing, transportation, and the environment. Again, done in English and Spanish, and the survey was open from February 22nd to April 15th. So just to give you a sense of who we heard from, I think there's no surprises here necessarily. We heard from a lot of white folks, more highly educated, higher income, and homeowners. I think the one interesting demographic response here is that the most people that we heard from, the age group that we heard the most from, was the 26 to 40-year-olds. So that was a little unusual. And then this is the geographic distribution of responses across the county. So we haven't had a significant amount of time to kind of analyze and review the comments. I think we got 323 responses in the end. So we've been looking through and reviewing those as we're moving forward. And so these are just some call outs of what we heard from folks. So I won't necessarily go through these. I'll leave these up a little bit and you can kind of read through them. But so people are interested in affordable housing, making sure that it's not concentrated in specific neighborhoods. It should be dispersed through Durham. A strong consensus for preserving neighborhood character with an emphasis on integrating new housing options. Majority of respondents rely on personal vehicles to get around the community. Respondents expressed the desire to, have more walking and biking options. And there was some suggestions for the city to kind of rethink some of its development practices, including how trees are dealt with and making sure we have all the stormwater management solutions that we possibly can. So it's a very good kind of mixed set of responses from folks. So as you can see from the survey, we weren't necessarily hearing from everybody that we wanted to hear for. So that's a good way to kind of benchmark our approach moving forward. So I was going to hand it over to Tawana, who's been working on our kind of equitable engagement material. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about what she's been doing since the beginning of the project.
Good morning, everyone. I am excited to meet with you today and share with you all of the work that we've been doing with equitable engagement. Our work began in November, around November, December of 2023, and that work included really us looking and examining the project. We took a walking and driving tour of Durham just so we could get a really good understanding of the areas that we were working with, that we would be working with, and the communities specifically that I would be engaging with. And then we had the community engagement kickoff. That work continued in January, where I met specifically with community engagement strategists that work with the city and the county. And the purpose of that meeting was to identify ways in which I could come into the communities and talk with our residents in Durham around specific ideas and situations and efforts to collaborate with the community strategist. Then from January, that work then moved on to February, where I began to think about creative ways to engage our community members, which community members we would want to engage, in those community members, where are they? what areas of Durham would be most appropriate for that. And so those initial community engagement sessions began with several Durham Housing Authority communities, some open houses that we planned along with a PAC-1 meeting. Now to transition to March and April, we are looking at how do we recruit and retrain
You're going in and out. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Your sound is going in and out.
Sorry. That better? Can you?
It's still coming in and out.
Do you want to try
You
turning?
want,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, do you want me to just see if I can do this slide?
Can you
You're still cutting in and out, Tawana.
if
Let me finish this off, Tawana, if that's okay.
yes, please. Yes.
Well, we've been working hand in hand with Tawana, making sure that we're trying to reach as many people as possible, or many different kinds of people as possible. And we've been meeting, weekly with both the city's community engagement strategist and Tawana to kind of fine tune who we've been meeting with. So it seems like Tawana's been working amazingly hard in getting out there and meeting as many different folks as possible. Tawana was at our open houses, and she has been taking names, and we've been meeting very impressive individuals that are very engaged in what's going on in the Durham community. And as you know, this is kind of like a separate contract, but I think we at Coach Studio have been blown away with just the level of interaction that's happening in terms of the conversations that are happening that just we simply couldn't have. And the really interesting thing about what Swan is doing is helping us take, fairly complicated concepts and trying to simplify them down so that, as many different people as possible can understand what we're talking about and what we're doing. So it's been a very, joyous and interesting from that perspective. So I was gonna
I'm gonna pause you for just a second. We have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to go back to engagement and just looking at, it sounds, great strategy to work with the PACs. Can you go back to the previous slide?
I'm trying to work on that, but there you go.
Yeah. I think it's, great to work with the PACs and the City County Office on Youth, things like that. I just want to just make sure that, and also just partnering with existing kind of gatherings of people and places and organizations. I do want to just highlight making sure that we are connecting with the rural parts of our community out in Northern Durham. And, that could be done through the Ruritan clubs and also groups like our seniors, Durham Center for Senior Life, and also our Latinx community. I'm thinking of, El Centro and other groups. These are just some of the groups that we traditionally often leave out and have to make extra engagement efforts with that I'm thinking about. So I just wanted to share that. And also, obviously places like the bus station or the libraries, or I just came from an event at Cooperative Extension. These are places where we're also going to see a lot of our community kind of moving through and especially around the library and cooperative extension. These are places that are safe places that a lot of people engage around. So I just wanted to suggest,
Thank you.
make those
Commissioner Jacob.
suggestions.
Thank you. Additionally, to that point, the county actually has an immigrant, what's a joint city-county position, immigrant refugees coordinator. I think actually trying to do focus groups with, I mean, that's why we have it, that position, specifically. So when we have opportunities like this, we can ensure that we are not just doing outreach to the Latino community, but to our broader immigrant and refugee community. And then I would be curious if you all have thought about running, and this happened with our comp plan, we had to go back and do a decent amount of reaching out to the Latino community and just running Spanish only focus groups. And I know that staff's aware of that, but I'm just wanting to lift that up as well. Thank you.
That is a plan. We are actually seeking Spanish-speaking ambassadors to help with that outreach.
Thank you. I think that, anybody else have a question?
Are they almost done, or should we ask
No,
questions
just
now?
on the engagement. I was gonna let him keep going.
Okay, well, in regards to engagement, so normally what I've seen happen is the same people show up to the same thing. And usually it's people who have the means to be there during that time. So I do like the comment of, being able to really poll who's not there and be intentional about reaching out to them. I hope that you'll go into some of the churches. I hope that, in addition to the community organizations that were just mentioned, and where are you all located? Where are you based out of?
Austin, Texas.
Okay.
I am here in Durham, Mayor.
Yeah, sorry.
Mayor Williams, I am here in Durham.
Okay, so you're familiar with the neighborhoods and community?
Absolutely. I've been in Durham since 1988. So I am familiar with the churches. I've made contact with the Ministerial Alliance here in Durham. We are working with the Latinx community by having Latinx engagement ambassadors who will help to pull together feedback from that community. And we are also working with the Asian and African community from Nigeria, the African communities as well.
All right. If you wouldn't mind, just shoot me an email, and I could, or maybe Sarah, I can work through you to just get them access to some other organizations that are reflective of the community at large. And the reason why I say this, I'm concerned that we are making a county and city decision based on the same folks all the time. So, thank you.
Thank you for that feedback, Mayor, and the committee.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hamilton.
And I think for me, the mayor just said pretty much what I was thinking as well, because you made a comment that the majority of the people that showed up were white and middle class upper. And that's not, okay, go ahead.
Just the survey responses. I would suggest at the open houses, we got a fairly, a variety of people showed up, at least at the one that was done downtown.
Okay, so I think the mayor spoke very clear about the inclusiveness that needs to happen. Yeah, thank you.
My role as the engagement ambassador will be to make sure that surveys are deployed to the most diverse communities. That is my role, to make sure that we're engaging the outreach with our most diverse populations.
Thank you.
We can keep going on the slides. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see. So this is getting into the kind of the meat of the presentation. And so one of the first things that we wanted to look at was just the kind of general organization of the EDO and how the individual articles are organized, and just from our perspective, there seems to be some like streamlining and reorganization that could happen. So we're proposing to kind of shrink the total number of articles down to 10 and just reorganize some of the material a little bit more intuitively from our perspective. So moving some of the administration components of the UDO to the back, those are still important pieces and we need to maintain those. We just don't think that that is necessarily the first thing that you should come to when opening up UDO. It's important. I think we feel like people want to get straight into the zoning district regulations. So we've moved administration to the back. And on the right-hand side there, you can see how we've moved kind of Article 2 and 3 from up front and Articles 14 and 15, which were already in the back, and we've consolidated those into a consolidated Article 9 called administration. We have a new article, potentially Article 4 called development standards, and we're taking kind of all those standards that apply kind of somewhat uniformly across all zoning districts and consolidated those into a single article. So we've taken Article 7 design standards, Article 9 landscaping, Article 10 parking, and Article 11 and put them all into Article 4. The idea being is that when you look at the table of contents for the first time, it's not as little intimidation as possible when you look at it. And kind of this is the big move, and I think we alluded to this in our last meeting with you, taking kind of the zoning districts themselves and consolidating all that material down so that you don't have to flip through several different sections of the ordinance to find the standards for your particular zoning district. So that's how that might look, just a consolidated 10 articles down from a higher number. I forget what it was exactly. So like I mentioned, the big move is, so today, if you want to figure out your dimensional standards for your district, you have to go, first you have to go to your intent statement, which is in section 4.2. Then you have to go to section 6.4 to figure out your development intensity standards, your density, and your height regulations. And then you have to flick to another section to find like your setbacks and your lot sizes. And so what we're proposing to do is consolidate that all down into a single section, which would have, you know, the intent statement for your district, some basic summary information for the variety of districts that might exist in a particular section, and then consolidating down all of the individual standards for a particular district all in one place. So the idea being that you could get the majority of your standards that you care about in order to kind of understand what you could build on a particular lot and site on these 2 pages. So that idea of flicking back and forth and figuring out what housing type you have would no longer apply. You would be able to go to these 2 sets of pages, figure out what your lot size is, what your density is, what the building coverage is, what your setbacks are, what's the maximum height of my building, do I have to put, you know, windows and doors on my building, all in one cohesive place.
Is there also, can you go, thank you. Is there also going to be like, if we're looking at other, I'm assuming there's an analysis from our either current UDO or where we're moving to what other communities have done and basically liberalizing as much as possible. Like I'm just essentially,
Yeah.
This is kind of what planners being architects. That's essentially what we need to figure out, like whose lane is whose, and then how does the code match that?
Okay. We definitely have a pretty strong handle on what other communities are doing. I guess that's one of the expertise that we bring to the table. We don't specifically have anything in here that looks at what any other community is doing, but we're happy to continue that conversation if you would like us to.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had this conversation. Just some background for me. I've been on council I think this is my seventh budget. And so I've been on council since through the whole comp plan rewrite, and have had lots of conversations with planning staff over the years to, you know, we passed the urban growth boundary, which I'm sure you're aware of. And
Mhm.
the only way that land use works, that idea works, is if you're going to make it inside, right, as dense and as easy as possible. Otherwise, you're just going to constrain your supply. And so I
Yep.
just need a UDO to really mirror that
Okay.
philosophical decision we've already made, which I think, you know, there was a lot of agreement around. But when you put a fixed boundary about sprawl, which is in my
Yep.
opinion the right thing, then what you're doing on the inside is critically important.
Okay. Well, we're going to have that conversation with you, and you can tell us how far we should go in terms of additional intensity within that urban growth boundary. So I
Just
think
say I want a city. I don't want, you know, that's just me. This is one voice, but we
Yep.
have a quickly growing. I think that there's probably a pretty understanding that we don't want to be Atlanta or Dallas, right? We don't want those communities from an infrastructure standpoint. It's just very costly. And so
Sure.
it's either up or out. I mean, that's essentially the decision that Durham has to make. And I think we've made that decision by passing an urban growth boundary.
Okay. So we'll touch on that in a second.
Sorry, Commissioner Jacobs.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. I really like the presentation of the information here. I like the fact that there are visuals along with the writing. And the way the information is organized, it just looks like it's with the charts and things like that. It just looks very accessible. So I just wanted to say that. And just to piggyback on what Javiera just said, I mean, I agree that we have to, you know, develop within the urban growth boundary and not be looking at rezonings outside of that. We need to really stick to that. But we also, I would look for your help with things like what is good design, because, you know, design is such an important part about how we have a good city and have it's livable and walkable. To me, it's all about design and also how we can still protect our natural environment at the same time. Thank you.
So I just wanted to touch on this, and you guys are already doing some thinking about this. But I think ultimately how people access your code is going to be a really important thing to think about. Because we can do all this good work and we can make the document look really inviting and understandable as possible. But we just got to make sure we take that through to however that information is getting displayed on the web. And you probably already understand this, but you know, the way that the code is displayed on general code isn't necessarily the best. And so we just need to do a little bit of thinking and making sure whatever we're doing, we're moving in the right direction to make sure we're doing as good a job as we can. I think we would, you know, we want people in the local community to have access to the code in an accessible way, but I also think we want people that are not necessarily in Durham that might be looking to come to Durham or do things in Durham to have access to the code and be able to use it and understand it as well. So, you know, general code suggests that they can do a really good job displaying some of the codes that we do online. I wouldn't necessarily agree. There are other methods, like Raleigh is using Flipping Book to display their code. I think, you know, it seems like you're having issues and Raleigh is having issues in terms of how quickly changes are showing up using the codifier. And I know Raleigh has decided to move away from Unicode, and I think you guys are exploring other options as well. And just from a kind of a future proofing perspective, just to get a sense of, I think, where you should be headed as a community is making sure that the zoning map or the digital version of the zoning map, to the extent that we can, is tied to the UDO. So ultimately, kind of what you would want to happen is you would pull up a digital version of the zoning map. You could type in your address. The system would find the address. The system would know based on your address what your zoning is. And the idea being that you could just click away from that map to some online version of the code, in just terms of like ultimate usability, and something that you should be thinking about from a kind of a best practice perspective moving forward.
You're getting a lot of eager head nods. I don't know how, yeah, so the folks here are excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you. So just jumping in kind of into kind of some of the technical analysis that we've done, just so you get a sense of what we're thinking and what we're doing. So, we wanted to start off by looking at the recently adopted comprehensive plan and the place type map. I think that is a foundation for the work that we'll be doing. And so we couldn't necessarily look at every single place type. We're happy to continue the conversation to see if additional place types need to be looked at or additional work is needed. But we've taken what we consider to be kind of the most important, I guess, from a kind of a housing and density and transportation perspective. So we're taking a look at the apartment and townhouse neighborhood place type, established residential place type, and the transit opportunity area place type, and just wanted to help you guys understand how you might currently implement those place types with your current tools, and then what changes might be needed in order to do a better job of implementing those place types in the future. So just so you know, as we go through these slides, and I'm going to come back to these questions, but it's for you to think about these questions as we go through the kind of remainder of the slides. So, just thinking about overall consolidation of the districts themselves, thinking about the naming convention of the districts. I think there's a general desire to get away from some of the terminology that you have today, the RU and the RS and that kind of tier-based system, to something that might be considered maybe a little bit more intuitive. Just asking yourselves, do we really need all the districts that we have in place? Can we simplify the system down? And so from a, I'm calling it like lower intensity, but the kind of established residential, is there a system where we could allow more units on a lot instead of duplexes or multiplexes? Like, what kind of intensity would you be comfortable allowing on kind of established residential lots? So restructuring some of the higher intensity residential and transit mixed use districts. So there's less emphasis on the units per acre metric, and maybe reorganize and rename the districts so they're based more on kind of stories. So it's a little more intuitive in terms of the overall intensity of districts and how they break down and how they relate to one another. So I'm going to go through some slides that are going to help you kind of maybe potentially answer some of these questions. And so when we looked at the established residential place type, it takes up a fair amount of land area in terms of, and we're looking just within the urban growth boundary here. There's about 23% of the land area is allocated to established residential place type. And these on the right-hand side are kind of the implementing districts that you kind of currently have to implement that place type. And so, we just wanted to first understand what the dimensional standards are associated for each district and how they relate to one another in terms of like a spectrum of intensity. And it varies greatly, right? So we've got the EHC, right, which you guys are pretty familiar with, but it allows you to take minimum lot size down to 2,000 square feet and reduce some of the setbacks. In exchange for that, your overall building cannot be as tall, 2 stories instead of 3 stories. And then there's a limit on the actual size of a building, 1,200 square feet. And you allow EHC, as far as we understand, in RU5, RU52, RS8, and RS10. And so, we just wanted to show you a little bit, like if you take the dimensional standards for an existing district, what that might look like when you build it out. So what you're seeing here is an image associated with each district, and each of these buildings is following the dimensional standards below. So, we're using the setbacks and we're using the maximum stories, and everything is what you might expect to see on a existing lot that was zoned RS8, for example. So, we just wanted to make sure we had a baseline and a decent understanding of what was going on from, RU5 all the way through to RR. And so that's quite a different level of intensity that might show up on the ground in your established residential place type. So we wanted to take a look at the EHC, since the EHC is allowed in most of your residential districts. We wanted to understand, using the existing constraints, what you could actually build on one of those lots using the EHC modeling from both a physical perspective and a financial perspective. So we've had Neil Heller from Neighborhood Workshop help us run some kind of high-level economic numbers so that we can understand, like, when you're doing this type of development, what does that generate in terms of final outcomes, in terms of like a final cost of that, a for sale cost for a house, and what that might look like on the rental market. So we looked at RU5 and we looked at RS10 just to kind of give us a bit of a spectrum across the community. And so we wanted to look at a corner lot for RU5. We wanted to look at kind of a mid-block, and then we just looked at mid-block for RS10. And we did several of these scenarios. This is just kind of a summary of the ones that we wanted to highlight from you. So on this RU5 corner lot, we've got 3 detached units on 3,000 square foot lots. That comes to about 15 units per acre. It's just to give you a sense. I know you don't regulate, seems like you don't regulate units per acre in the EHC size. And then we're limiting the unit size to 1,200 square feet. We ran that scenario for RU5 on a mid-block and RS10 in a mid-block as well. And so, as I mentioned, we ran some high-level pro forma. So Neil has talked to local developers in the community, talked to folks at the city, just to get a kind of a general understanding of what it costs to develop in Durham based on a specific program. So I don't necessarily expect you to read these, and we do have these available that we could send to you if you wanted to dig into some of the details. But what we found, and this is kind of making sense in the community, I think maybe you'll recognize some of these numbers, but if you wanted to do a for sale product using kind of the EHC standards in RU5 and RS10, you might expect to see a final sales price of about $400,000, which comes in at about, at the level of your existing AMI across the community. So that, from a developer's perspective, that seems to work. And I think that's why you're seeing a number of these projects showing up today in and around Durham. So we wanted to run that same kind of pro forma on if you were going to potentially rent these out instead of sell them. And so what we found, because of the costs and the difference in financing and how that all works, that the rental numbers, if you wanted to rent these, would come in a little bit higher than I think that you would like to see when you measure this up against the AMI across Durham. And so it's probably the reason that you're not seeing any of these recently built EHC projects coming in as rental, because the numbers aren't there. And it is expensive to build brand new development, and that just doesn't typically pencil out in the rental market. What you'll typically see is older houses and stuff doing better in the rental market, just because that cost is already fixed in and it's historic cost. And so it's just hard to make brand new single family construction make sense from a rental perspective. And I think something that we would like to strive for is to give you more options when it comes to making houses available or more units available in the rental market that isn't necessarily single family or large scale multifamily. So we wanted to take kind of like a deeper dive, if you were. And so today in RU5, you are allowed to do a multiplex if you're on a certain type of roadway that has greater than 50 feet in width of right of way. So we wanted to kind of play around with these scenarios just to see what would happen if we ran the numbers on the rental numbers for these different development patterns here. So this is basically your existing requirements. If you wanted to do a multiplex in RU5 today, there is a maximum density of 8 dwelling units per acre. So because of that restriction, you would have to have basically a 21,000 square foot lot if you wanted to do a 4-unit multiplex in Durham today. And so it would look something like that. So you would have to have a fair amount of land area associated with your development in order to do a multiplex. So we wanted to look at some different kind of strategies just to see how we could fine tune that and make more efficient use of your land within the urban growth boundary. So we looked at like, well, what would happen if you just got rid of the maximum density of 8 units per acre and just focused on the 4-unit max on a lot. So your current regulations today for a multiplex basically say the most you can do is 4 units on a lot. Doesn't necessarily mean it's 4 attached units. And in this particular case, we've just done 2 duplexes on a lot. And so we wanted to see what that would do financially and how it would perform. Then we wanted to look at, okay, well, what happens if you get rid of the 4 units per lot cap and that you could, for example, put 8 units on an individual lot? What would that do to the financial? So this, what you're looking at is 2 fourplexes on a lot, so a total of 8 units. So Neil ran the pro forma numbers for that. And so this will just give you a sense as we go through this of what the average monthly rent might be if you were to use that kind of development pattern. So if you were to do no change and you would build the 2 duplexes, and we were looking at an average unit size of 1,000 square feet, just for comparison's sake across these scenarios, what would it look like? And so this first scenario is coming in at $3,500 a month, 132% of AMI, which I would say is pretty high, right? So nobody's probably going to do that. Okay, so that second scenario that we looked at, you'll see that just by removing the density and basically shrinking the land size in half, we've changed the number here. So that number has come down from $3,500 a month to about $2,800 a month. So it's coming down, it's getting closer to something that we might like to see as kind of market rate priced units. And so, okay, then we've modified the density and we've allowed more than 4 units on that individual lot. In this particular case, 2 fourplexes. So we've dropped that average monthly rent down to $2,500. So we were at $3,500 and we've come down to $2,500 now. And so those are kind of policy changes that the city could make, right? You could decide that you don't want to regulate density at this level anymore, and then maybe we could consider adding more than 4 units on a lot, because it does make an impact in terms of the outcome, particularly as it relates to rental products in the community. But what about some market changes? So what happens if you took the 1,000 square feet per unit and you drop that down to 800 square feet? Like, what would that do to the final outcome? And you'll see, so just dropping that 200 square feet down to 800 square feet has dropped the average monthly rent down to almost $2,000 a month, which I think is getting way closer to where we might want to be with kind of unsubsidized market rate housing. And then, so you guys don't regulate parking. And so one of the things I forgot to mention is that we are assuming parking in most of these scenarios, even though you don't require it. I think there's still going to be a tendency for the market to want to provide some parking. And so we are assuming 1 space per unit. And so what happens if you drop that number down to half a space per unit? And you'll see that drops the price a little bit more, not a great deal. So it's not having any huge impact in the final outcome. And then, you know, kind of getting a little bit more radical here. What happens if you were to add not only the 2 fourplexes, but add a duplex on that lot as well? And that would take that number down even further to below almost at $1,900 a month. So you can just see like some of the changes that can happen from a policy perspective and from a market perspective, and how they might impact the final outcomes in terms of cost of housing moving forward. So next we wanted
Sorry,
to
real
look
quick,
at
we have a couple of questions. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Yeah, could you leave it there? Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Jacobs.
I really appreciate this exercise. It's really helpful. But I guess there's an assumption that, I guess, how can we even count on the fact that the price would come down? I mean, isn't it possible that the developers would just be like, I'm going to still have I'm going to still try to make as much money as I can off of these units. So I guess, where is that assumption coming in that developers are going to charge less for these units?
I think that's probably more of a fair statement when it comes to the for sale product. But I think you kind of have to look at this, I think, big picture, and you have to look at it over time. And I don't think it's anything that is necessarily going to happen overnight. But you do see market rents fluctuate considerably across a community over a period of time. And it's not unusual in marketplaces, as more housing is provided, that you see rents drop.
And is there any scenario that you have seen where the use of implementing these policies is not just by right, but is actually explicitly tied to, you know, some type of commitment to making sure that the rent or the housing is affordable? Is there any mechanism relate? I mean, I'm just saying, is there, because, you know, again, we do have incentives, or we have other ways to ensure that they will have the outcome we want. I'm just, but
well, we want to look at your incentive program that you have in place. But I guess I would suggest that this kind of strategy that we're looking at right now is something that could impact the entire community. And those affordable housing incentive programs are really hard to make work in terms of balancing the financials associated with them. And so it's difficult. And I don't know necessarily anybody that's doing an exceptional job with a affordable housing bonus program. There's probably a few places around the country, but you know, what we've heard, and this is just anecdotally, is it takes about 10 market rate units to afford a single affordable unit, depending on what AMI you're trying to hit. But it's really difficult at this scale. I think at once you start getting to the 300 unit scale, it probably makes a little bit more sense and it's easier. But this is really focused on it's a strategy for trying to provide more intensity across, a large, significant portion of the community.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, expanding housing choice has never been about actually creating affordable housing.
Yeah.
You know, we went into that wide open, knowing that
Yeah.
it's just to increase supply and
Yeah.
diversity, but
I think
yeah,
that's the point, though. The point
Yeah.
does supply over time decreases at least rentals. And I think you can see
Yeah.
markets across the country. I think Austin is a great example right now. I mean, their rentals are decreasing quickly.
Yeah.
And they have probably built the most stuff in the last 5 years that I am aware of.
Yeah.
So yeah, it takes time, but I mean, that's essentially filtering, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's supply and demand and it's filtering. Like the folks who can afford higher housing will stay in their lane if the supply at that level is there. But they're gonna go to housing that is less expensive and stay in lanes where people can't play because we haven't provided the supply at all different kinds of levels. And this is essentially a solution just for kind of small incremental building that is market rate. So this is not using the
Yes.
power of government with subsidy
Right.
and other things. I mean, this is basically one potential tool in a toolbox on housing.
And you'll just see in some of the following slides, like we don't necessarily get into it from an economic perspective, just because I don't think we have the capacity to do that. But you'll see that, like, you've just got your densities and your intensities all wrong in some of your other districts. And so, you know, this is just kind of a comprehensive issue, and I think something you just need to relook at holistically from top to bottom to make sure that what your plan is saying you want, you can do with your zoning, and right now it just isn't working whatsoever.
Thank you. Could you go back one more slide? I think I'm on the, yeah, so did you all do this for the other, so this is RU5, right? So,
Mhm.
I'm not expecting this for today, but like, did you run because you named several areas or districts that,
Mhm.
yeah, RU5, RS10, that you were kind of applying this analysis to. And so I would be
Yeah.
curious to see, and I will own again, I'm one person. I want to see the highest intensity possible, even if it's not where we land, but at least that the folks who have to actually make the decision, it's a decision point. We can decide we don't want to move that way, but then neighbors are actually saying, well, I don't actually want to use all the tools in my toolbox around affordability. And that's fine, but then I think folks need to be transparent about what they're saying they want.
So this last scenario here, the the two fourplexes and a duplex, that is putting 10 units on basically a 10,000 square foot lot, which is a lot, I would suggest, from terms of intensity. So that, not sure if you'd want to go that much further in terms of putting that many units on a lot. And that's what that number is getting you. And we did run more numbers for these scenarios, but basically they were all coming out the same. We ran a lot for the for sale, and just because of the unit size constraint on the for sale stuff, all the numbers were coming out pretty much the same. So we didn't spend a ton of time showing you what we have done.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions about this? Okay, we can keep going. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we would consider this kind of your multifamily land, and it doesn't take up a ton of land, and so that's, you know, ultimately may be a concern. There are other place types here that fill in the gaps that might offer more intensity from a residential perspective, but this will just kind of give you a sense of, like, if you took your current tools and you wanted to implement this place type, this is what it might look like from an overall intensity perspective. And we didn't, like I said, we didn't run the numbers for these scenarios just because it's too complex and there's too many moving parts. But I think you'll get a sense of, like, are you regulating the right things to generate the outcomes that you might want to see as a community? And so key implementing zoning districts today for this place type would be RSM, RUM, and RC. So residential suburban, residential urban, and residential compact multifamily districts. And so these are the minimum standards for each of those districts associated with the law above, right? So RSM has a cap today of 8 units per acre, and that's kind of the riding metric for that district. RUM has a maximum density of 12 units per acre, and then RC has a maximum density of 40 units per acre. I do want to state that there are a number of kind of density bonuses that you have embedded in your code. It is kind of complicated and it's hard to understand. So we've just, for the most part, stuck with the base. But for example, in RC, you can get a 50% density bonus if you provide ground floor commercial. So there are some little nuances in your ordinance. But if you were to take, for the most part, your existing densities and try to build something to implement this place type, this is what you might see. You would need, based on the 8 units per acre, you would need, almost half an acre of land if you wanted to build 4 units in RSM. So there's a lot of land needed in order to get to those 4 units. In RUM, it's slightly better. There's a 12 units per acre cap. But if you were to build something on that same lot of half an acre, this is what it might look like. Again, a lot of land associated with not much building. And that has, ultimately would have cost implications because the cost of that land would show up in the final cost of that building or those units. RC is a little bit better, 40 units per acre. But this is something that you might expect in your most intense, I would consider your most intense multifamily district. So you just have to ask yourself, is that necessarily what we want to be seeing in some of our more intense multifamily districts? And so we wanted to just kind of run an exercise so you could get a sense of like, well, what would that look like if, for example, we eliminated the density cap? So if you took RSM and we tried to kind of, build this out as most intensely as we could from a kind of a developer's perspective, ignoring the numbers, and we've included parking in here. So you don't require parking, but our sense is that the marketplace is still going to want to provide some parking. So we've just, for simplicity's sake, provided 1 space per unit. So that's been kind of the kind of limiting factor in a sense in terms of what you can actually get on the site, depending on your strategy, what your strategy is to accommodate parking. So for RSM, if you eliminate density, for example, on that same size lot where you got 4 units, we were able to get 32 units on that same site at 600 square feet per unit. So, kind of a 1-bedroom or a small 2-bedroom apartment. We were able to get 32 units in that same amount of space where you got 4 units. And then for RUM, we managed to get 54 units on there, and that comes out to a density of 104 units per acre, where you today limit it at 12 units per acre. And then for RC, again, the overall constraint was parking, and we didn't want to necessarily go to any kind of structured parking scenario. So we are using kind of tuck under parking here. And I'm sure there's other ways to do this that other people might choose to do it. But we managed to get 67 units on that lot at 130 units per acre. So there's quite a difference between these different scenarios based on your density caps that you have in place today. And so I think one of your key place types for the future and making sure that we're accommodating transit and thinking about ways to get people out of cars is making sure that we have density and intensity around existing and proposed transit lines and stops. So we wanted to take a look at your transit opportunity area, and you have kind of 2 key implementing zoning districts today, CD and CSD. So compact design core and compact suburban design core. And you have a number of sub-districts in there. And again, for simplicity's sake, we just wanted to look at like the most intense district associated with that, with the most intense sub-district associated with that district, just to see what you could develop on there. And so you do have higher densities here, 60 units per acre. And then in this particular case, you have 30 units per acre. We would suggest that the maximum height limits associated with each of these districts don't necessarily make sense with the allocation of density. So particularly in this case, you could do a 145-foot high building, approximately 12 stories, but the maximum density for that district, and I understand it's suburban, is only 30 units per acre. So what you're going to likely generate, if you wanted to do 12 stories, is more of a tower in the park model than more of a, a building. And so again, we went through this exercise just to get a sense of like physically what would it look like, what type of intensity would show up on these lots using the existing constraints that you have in place today. And since these are kind of like transit areas, we did reduce the parking in half to 50%. So instead of 1 per unit, we're looking at 0.5 spaces per unit. And I think what you're seeing is because of the density constraints, you're never going to get up to a 7-story building, and you're certainly not going to get a 12-story building. You're going to get, again, a lower intensity building surrounded by open space or parking for the most part. So, we wanted to, again, run that scenario and see what we could generate, right? So we're using half the amount of parking from the previous scenarios. So we were able to get 100 units at 600 square feet in this compact design core scenario, 145 units per acre, up from 60 units per acre. And in the suburban, we really went crazy, and we took literally that you wanted to get 12 stories. So we did a 12-story building with 118 parking spaces, and we're able to get that up to 340 units per acre. So you've gone from 30 units per acre to 340 units per acre. And I'm not suggesting necessarily you want this showing up in your suburban areas. So we'd have to do a little bit of rethinking and restructuring, but it just gives you a sense of what intensities might be achieved if you were to eliminate the units per acre. So I think just wanted to make the point that, as we're developing rules that allow bigger and more intense buildings, we want to make sure that we have the tools in place so that we're managing the impact of larger buildings on the site. So one of the things that we focus on, not only do we focus on vertical intensity, so maximum height in stories or feet, for example, but we make sure we're looking at horizontal intensity to make sure that buildings are, to the extent that they can be, are at kind of a human scale and work within the existing environment that they're intended to be in. So this is, if you just took a big building and you didn't, for the most part, regulate maximum building width, you might see a building this long show up on a site. Yes, and it might be articulated, and this is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think you get the point, and it's one really long building. And if you use, a metric that regulates building width, say 150 feet, for example, you can start to, break up buildings along a site so that they're not as long and they're a little bit more human scaled and a little bit less intimidating as people, either walk or drive or bike along the street. So this is 150 feet in building width. And you can see, if you take that down to 75 feet, for example, how that differentiates between one long building down to, several smaller buildings along the site. And, so you might be using this metric in different settings to kind of achieve the kind of building width that you might match with some of the existing character that's in place today. So, you can just regulate maximum building width and then making sure you're getting the appropriate break in between buildings for spacing needs. One of the things that we've heard in doing this is that, when you're talking about larger scale developments, it makes more sense from an efficiency perspective to have one long building in terms of how that building might get constructed. And so we have built-in allowances that, you know, if you do a deep enough courtyard, for example, that's wide enough, so it kind of looks like multiple buildings, you could in fact just have one single building, but it really, you know, for all intents and purposes, might look like two separate buildings. So we have built-in tools like that. And then, you know, just making sure that we're regulating the right things so that when you have more intense development with buildings closer to the street, we're making sure that we're getting kind of active street fronts. And you do a lot of this in your design districts, but we just want to make sure that you understand that we understand that's a very important thing to regulate. One of the things that we regulate is active depth. So what you don't want to do, even within buildings, is have parking necessarily come up to the facade, whether that's, you know, in a parking structure or whether that's, you know, just in the upper stories. We like to try to push parking back so that it's just a different environment if you're willing to kind of push that parking back within a building so that you're getting active space along the street front. And then just making sure you're getting, you know, ground floor and upper story transparency along building facades and entrances that are regularly spaced along the street are important things when you're talking about adding intensity into an environment. And so just going back to these questions, I'll kind of just go through them quickly and then I'll open it up for discussion. But we've been talking this through with staff, and this idea of consolidating RU5, RU5 2 and RU5 are basically the same district now because of SCAD. They allow the same things, but consolidating that up with our RS8 and RS10, and then maybe considering a new name, just throwing something out there like RN, residential neighborhood, combining R20 and RR, maybe that needs a new name. You know, should we consider tying the naming of these districts to the comp plan place types? Just wanted to throw that out there for discussion. And so this idea of allowing more than 4 units on in RU5 or a consolidated set of districts that might be called RU5 or something new like RN, you know, if so, like, is that 6 units per lot? Is that 8 units per lot? Interested in your thoughts about that. So if we do have this consolidated set of RU5/RN lots, could we allow it across the whole spectrum of that zoning district? Today, for example, in RU5, if you wanted to do 4 units, not only do you have to have a significant amount of land area, but you're only allowed to do it on what are major thoroughfares and boulevards with a right-of-way larger than 50 feet. So could we just kind of like allow more intensity across all neighborhoods to a certain extent? Restructuring what we're calling the higher intensity /transit/ mixed use districts. Instead of basing that on a units per acre, base it on something like maximum story height and including that in the district name. And we just got some example district names here for you, but something like CX3, CX5, and so that when you look at these districts, you would understand like CX8. Oh, I get it. It's a commercial emphasis mixed use district that has an 8-story maximum. And then just this idea in general of eliminating units per acre, I think you can see that it's generating some interesting outcomes. And I think also with the recent SCAD amendments, now you have residential uses in some of your non-residential districts that don't have any density requirements. And so you might be getting a more intense residential development in some of your commercial districts than you're getting in some of your residential districts today. So we could go back to these questions, but just to give you a sense of where we're headed. So we're listening to your feedback today. I think we need to think about how to roll this out to the general public so we can get some feedback from them about the approach that we're taking. And then, then we'll be moving forward with code drafting itself till about early next year. We hope to have public review drafts available, and then starting in around February or March of next year, we would start rolling this out to the public, and it would start going into the formal adoption process. Sorry if that took so long, but so interested in your thoughts as a group about some of the recommendations that we might have made today.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the way that you're helping us, thinking through these different options. I think that, you got into it a little bit at the end when you were talking about the horizontal scale. I made the comment earlier about design is going to be really key. That's something that we haven't always really had in Durham. is really that guidance around good design. And, I just think that's going to be a really key component of this, because there can be very negative impacts related to, street activity, safety, natural light, all of these, can be unintended consequences of things not being done with human scale, or how things fit into the existing fabric. And I think also, when you do take this out to the community, I think I appreciate the way that you are showing this with visuals. I think it's going to be important to have honest conversations with the community about the possible positive or negative impacts of any of these different scenarios, as well as we get feedback from people, kind of, big picture and small picture, that type of thing. One of my questions was around the transit-oriented opportunity areas. Does that include some of the redevelopment of some of our commercial strips where we have, just without looking at the place type map, do you know that, do these include some of the existing commercial that we have, like, strip malls, kind of defunct malls, things like that? Do you know?
I don't know that, but maybe Bo does.
Okay.
Sure. Commissioner Jacobs. Yes, some, it does include some of them. Obviously, I don't have them all memorized, but there are some examples of
okay.
where that's.
Because when you asked about, these are the different places that we're focusing on, and you did those, the 3 different groups. I think for me, I think that some of our existing commercial areas are opportunities along major roads, strip malls and things like that are really going to be opportunities for redevelopment of mixed use and also incorporating housing. So I guess I would ask you guys to look at that. The other thing that I'm really interested in is publicly controlled land. And, between the city and the county and Durham Public Schools, and when you look at things like parking lots or even Durham Housing Authority properties, we actually control a lot of land, publicly controlled land. And those to me are going to be the places where we can hopefully have more impact related to affordable housing, and permanent affordable housing or long-term affordable housing. So is it possible for you all to identify within, when you're looking at these different, focusing on these different areas, to also pull out which are the publicly controlled parcels? Again, it can just be a surface parking lot.
I can respond to that, actually. So I know some of that work the city is doing, and some of that's getting done by outside. I don't know, like, I don't know if this would fall under their scope.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Well, it's just, for me, it ties into as we redo the code.
Yeah,
You know.
I mean, that there's an intersection there, but it's not going to be the consultant's job to do that, I don't think. I mean, it wasn't included in their original contract.
Okay. Okay. So is that going to be kind of then happening simultaneously?
So I'll just chime in and say that type of analysis for publicly controlled land is not part of their scope and contract. I do know that there is work on the part of the city, at least. General Services has typically looked at this and they periodically do this. I don't know kind of where they are right this second with that, but that is something I've worked with General Services in the past on analysis like that. So we can check with them and then we can, check with county as well and see where they are. But that is a very specific analysis of public land that is not part of the scope of this.
Okay. And also, like I said, the schools, I just think it's important that as we're looking at whatever codes we're going to adopt, it does pertain to, these are opportunities.
Commissioner Jacobs, it's my understanding that the Duke Housing Group is doing that analysis already, and that the city is doing a deeper analysis of not only what land do we hold, but what is the actual zoning of it? Like, what are the opportunities there? Can you actually build housing or not?
Well, and I'll say that as we then go to map whatever the new districts are, we can certainly keep an eye on those publicly owned lands and have conversations about what the most appropriate zoning that furthers the aims of the city and county for what they want to do with that land, to make sure that it is zoned in a way that maximizes our ability as local government to contribute.
Does anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, I have a couple questions. This is more to I don't know what slide it was. So I really appreciate a lot of thank you, that slide, the key question slide. I think that the kind of the combining, the naming and aligning it with our place type map, just from a user friendly perspective, I think makes sense. Getting everyone kind of oriented the same way. I guess my question is more, and this is something that there needs to be some education about. I often say, because I know that folks can get really upset about some of the building that they see, especially downtown, because of the kind of massing of the building, kind of to your point around the horizontal. Part of that is our own building code, which the city has to follow as state, right? So the reason that we see a lot of those, and you're seeing them all over the country, you kind of those 5-over-1 podium that people kind of get tired of looking at. Because you can't go over 5 stories unless you get into steel framing, and we're not allowed to do mass timber framing, which you're already seeing in Europe. One of the other things that we are not allowed to do is have, just one single stair that the building is built around. Again, something that you see in other parts of the world. So what are the opportunities, even if it's not something that we are allowed to do currently, the opportunities within our building code that would actually get to better design standards if we were allowed to do them? Because I think the average person on the street does not understand that the person designed a building based on what they're allowed to put there, not necessarily what they like or don't like.
Well, I don't think we'll be specifically getting into the building code per se, if that was your question.
Just want to know what the opportunities are. And maybe this is a question for staff. I want folks to where are the places that we need to advocate for? I think one of the wins that we had maybe last year is that in North, to do triplexes and quads, it was in the commercial code that shifted, but that prevented building because you're going to have to do fire suppression, and that was really expensive to try and figure out for a triplex or quad. That changed in North Carolina, but that's an example of limitations on our own building code, and then how the public actually interacts and is knowledgeable about that, meaning that then their interaction with the building it's based on, that the developer just wants to make money. Yes, and they have to build a building to code, and so they are following the rules, and the rules allow for that design.
Yes, those are great points. I don't think we'll necessarily be able to get into that with this project, but it is good for us to be aware of them. For example, I know Memphis, for example, has recently been working with their building code to change that IRC, so to get projects under the International Residential Code to 8 units. You suggested you change them to 4, for example, but that changes like that would be huge if you could reduce the level of complexity for some of this lower scale residential stuff. If you could get it reviewed at a different category, for example, would be huge. But some of those other issues that you're talking about, like the ingress and egress, are conversations that communities are having across the country, and some are having better luck at it than others.
Thank you. And I think Director Young wants to chime in.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that, one thing that we can do as a part of this is once we get down the road with some, drafted proposals, is engage our inspections department and have them kind of take a look and, see from their perspective, building code wise, what the likely results are going to be, what some impediments might be. Again, this is outside the scope of this engagement, but we can engage our inspections department to start looking at it once we have some drafts. And, maybe we can work with them to see if they can, seek some changes potentially.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Howardson.
Just want to know, and thank you so much for this presentation. Timeline. What's your timeline as far as getting something complete into the public to view? Is this
So
okay?
we are
Yeah.
working
Okay.
through and refining that with the city and trying to come up with you guys and get more specific with this timeline. So we're currently working on that, but we're kind of currently shooting big picture that we would have drafts available for the general public in and around February or March of next year.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything? Any questions? Okay. Just thank you so much. That was really in depth and really helpful, and definitely the exercises on what is currently allowed and what options there are, potentialities, was really helpful to see.
Thank you.
And then Director Young, go ahead.
Yeah, as we wrap up, I want to make sure that we have some agreement in terms of some of the big policy direction spaces that we want to go in. One, specifically the notion that inside the urban growth boundary is really where we want to focus and densify. That helps preserve everything outside the urban growth boundary as more kind of environmentally sensitive and more rural kind of character areas. So really focusing our growth inside the UGB. 2, really consolidating districts as much as possible, naming them something different than what they're named today. And just, I will tell you from a staff perspective, the logistics of looking backwards in time and not having to guess whether this is like the old RU5 district or the new RU5 district, and the clarity of that for us and applicants, homeowners, et cetera. What was the other big thing I wanted to touch on? The notion, I think, related to the UGB that, and I think this has been said in multiple spaces previously, that everyone should expect some amount of increased density in their neighborhood. And so just knowing that we would be pursuing that for these consolidated districts. And then also naming things in a convention that is a little more, it's clearer, that, for instance, that the number means height. RU5 today, no one knows that the 5 stands for 5,000 square feet for a lot. And most people don't have a sense of what a 5,000 square foot lot actually looks like in real life anyway. But someone definitely has a context of what an 8-story building looks like. So being clear with that. And then the last thing, which is probably the biggest thing, is going away from density caps and focusing more on form-based standards, because density is kind of arbitrary and doesn't really give you a sense of what something will look and feel like on the ground. So I wanted to see if there was any heartburn about any of that in general. Of course, details have to be worked out, but.
Can we just do a thumbs up? So, and then for the I'm comfortable with everything that's been stated. And then just for staff, obviously there were several planning, JCCPC members who were not here today. So just following up with them, I guess would be my one ask.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with them, send them an email, link them to the YouTube recording of this meeting, ask if they would, kindly watch and give any feedback and offer to meet with them individually if needed.
Is there a kind of timeline for that? I don't want folks who weren't able to attend, while I wasn't here, and then in a month or two. And I don't have a problem being like, you got this much time. Like, I will be that person. Thank you. I'll be telling them they got to provide feedback in the next 2 weeks. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we are adjourned. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.